Hi there, it's Polly here. Oh, me and Hello Kitty. Me and Hello Kitty and Mr. Snoots, a fine trio. So, we've got a board game for you, and this is one of my favourites, one of my all-time favourites. Okay, so this is from GMT Games, who are a great little company, by the way. Check them out. They do some really great board war games. This one is elegant in its simplicity. Brilliant piece of work. Nightfighter. Very, very good game. It's not full of fripperies. It's just a straightforward, excellent game. So, this is a game of World War II night fighters versus bombers. And as such, it's a really interesting piece of work, and it brings out a lot of great historical details in aircraft and so on. It does it simply. More on that later. So, the basic idea is you are running a night fighter. One of the players is playing the night fighter side. You might be running a single night fighter, and that is the simplest way to play it. But when you get better, you can have multiple night fighters on the night fighter side. Those could be run by one player, or you could have multiple players playing the night fighters. But there is an umpire in this game, and he is mostly there running the mechanics for the joy of the other players. So there are some information on all the different aircraft and so on here, and all the different radars, measures, countermeasures, and so on in this sort of thing. And then we've really just got we got rules. There are some campaign play sheets. There is an optional campaign system in here. There are, where'd you go? There is a set of supplemental rules, which are advanced rules, which are well worth putting in. And there is a scenario book. You've got counters and so on. Obviously, it comes with dice, fantastic. And you have two maps, two identical maps. One's for the umpire, and one is for the night fighter players. Now, the cardboard ref sheet goes up as a DM screen in exactly the same way we would do it in a role-playing game. So how does this work, you might ask? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. So, the game uses a series of bomber counters, and the maps, if you can see, are hexagons in the traditional style, and they're split into sectors. These sectors become meaningful in a bit. Now, there is a bomber stream. The map is a long oblong. The bombers are entering from somewhere on the bottom of the screen, and they're making their way up to exit from the top. When it is the bomber's turn, the umpire is essentially, he's rolling on a chart which tells him how many bombers are coming on board. And this differs scenario to scenario, obviously. So the scenario book will tell you roll, and it'll tell you how many and what sort of bombers and so on are coming onto the screen. So if you're doing like the classic, 1943 British bomber campaign sort of thing over Germany, you'll get Sterlings and Lancasters kind of drifting in. Sometimes you get more than one a turn entering. You can get like 3 or 4 a turn coming in. Sometimes you get one. But anyway, they come in. So you've got this constant kind of stream of these things making their way in the dark. Those sectors that are on the board, depending on the scenario, some of these become searchlight sectors. Those are areas defended by searchlights and flak batteries. The night fighter, or night fighters, you pick your aircraft and so forth, and you come on the board. You're trying to tackle these bombers and get rid of them. And the scenario will say something like, if you can down like 2 aircraft, that's it, you've won. Or if you've got multiple night fighters, whoever gets the most bombers wins. Or it can be quite difficult. If you can even stop these guys getting off you have to get at least 3 bombers down between you over the night. Depends. But the bombers have a visual tally range. That is a visual range in which they can actually see incoming aircraft. The night fighters all have a range, and it depends on the weather. In really good weather, they might be able to see physically with the eye things from up to, like, say, 3 hexes away. if it's a lovely moonlit night and it's clear. However, normally they're only going to be able to visually see 1 or 2 hexes. So, bomber's turn, bomber streams come on, the bombers move. If the bombers go through a flak area, they might take damage. But we're not actually too worried about that. We're mostly worried about what the flak is actually dangerous mostly to the poor old Nightfighters. If they cross through flak areas, they can be accidentally hit by flak. There's interesting things in this that I hadn't really thought of until I played this game, such as if it's a cloudy night, the searchlights actually shine on the clouds and it silhouettes bombers if they're seen by night fighters who are above them. You can see the black silhouettes of the bombers against these illuminated clouds. So a cloudy night can actually be quite dangerous for the bombers. You kind of want a clear moonlit night, and they can also deliberately backlight clouds by flare drops and these sorts of things, and they can actually try dropping flares at lower altitude to try and silhouette bombers as well. The main thing about the searchlight areas is that if a bomber goes over it, the searchlights can illuminate one and fix on them. Any given region can only illuminate a single bomber at a time, even if multiple bombers cross it, because the searchlights can only fix on one, but that target then becomes illuminated so that it appears on the board. There's the counter. Because the umpire is the only one with the bombers actually on his map. The Nightfighter guy has just got a blank map with himself, and he knows where the different searchlight areas are. He only sees something if it appears. So if a bomber is illuminated, bing, suddenly a counter appears in this area, heading this way, oh crap, get after it. Or if he suddenly sees something. There's some little modifiers to the whole process, but what happens is if you have someone in tally range, that is potential vision range, there's a number of dice that you roll. Depends on if it's a clear night and so on. But you roll these dice, and each bomber counter has a number on it. If any of those dice comes up with that bomber's number on it, then you can see it. So, and the numbers aren't that scattered. There's essentially pretty much 4, 5s and 6s really. So you can, if you've got 3 or 4 bombers within your general potential tally range, you might be able to pick up 1 or 2 of them, but you can only, they're your potential tallies, you roll, and if you've got multiple choices, you have to fix one as the one that you actually lock onto, because, this is the one your crew is straining to see. There are some little modifiers to the dice, and an interesting one is you have some vehicles actually are easier to see because they don't have hoods over the exhaust. So you get kind of a blue flare coming from the exhaust. Now, the bombers can actually get a tally on you too. The umpire's rolling for this when you get close. And if they catch a hint that there's a night fighter in the area, then they become alert. So when you approach them, you can take damage from their defensive guns, or the bomber might corkscrew and move away from you. If you've got a night fighter that has those, unhooded engines blurring away, and there are some German ones that don't have those hoods. Some of the most surprising ones that, when you look at the stats, hey, that's a killer of a bomber. It's like, yeah, but it's got some actual problems. There's some other things like the TA-152 Mosquito, which was sort of one of the many kind of ridiculous super night fighters that the Germans tried to do. It's only got a narrow view from the cockpit, so you can only do tallies basically from straight ahead. It doesn't have side views because it's got these huge sodding great engine nacelles on either side. Plus, it's got a lot of, it burned hot, so it's actually quite easy to see. I think the Focke-Wulf Uhu is also easy to see because the engines burn hot. But in come the search radars, and here's where it becomes a deadly game of Marco Polo. So, search radars in this are called AI, Air Intercept Radars. There are ground sets and there are sets on the actual night fighters. The ground sets, they're not very accurate this period. So what happens is you place a counter, and that is the center of the radar's air search, and that counter, depending on the type of radar, and they're listed in here, they have a radius. So essentially, the Nightfighter player puts down one search radar counter for each radar they've got, and they are told in the scenario book what regions the different radars can reach into. And if there is a bomber within the range listed on the counter, from that counter, the umpire tells them that they have picked up a bomber. So there is basically a spook mark goes there in the center of the area, but that is not actually where the bomber is. It's somewhere in that search region. So you want to try and get multiple search radars that overlap their areas a little bit, because that's how you're going to figure out where it is. The fact that there's something within 4 hexes of this, radar search area isn't useful, but if you've had a second one that overlaps it by half and is 4 from here and 4 from here, that suddenly lets you know it's somewhere in these 1 or 2 hexes in this direction. So that's how you're going to find it. You have the actual nose radars on the fighters themselves, and these essentially pretty much just have a straightforward look, but they will actually show up an aircraft if it is down that line within a set range, depending on the set. And now here's where it starts getting interesting and hinky. So your radars and so on, you haven't had any illuminations, but your radars have said that there's some kind of bomber, and you've narrowed it down to like somewhere in the 3 or 4 hex area. You zoom in with a Nightfighter that has a magnificent 4 range on its Liechtenstein, and bing! Aha! There is a bomber, and you put it down. It's not alert because you've crept up from behind it. You've got to maneuver yourself into the same hex in the same direction as the bomber, and then you can fire. But there are all kinds of interesting countermeasures out there, and they will again appear depending on the scenario. Excellent scenarios, by the way. It was fascinating. They have a whole list of all the different electronic attack measures, electronic countermeasures, countermeasures, etc. So, in essence, you get ground radars and flight radars. The Allies come up with ways of jamming, blocking, and interfering with these. The Germans come up with ways of either physically homing in on these measures that the Allies are using to jam these things, or they're coming up with their own jamming methods. So you get these full lists of all the different measures and how they affect the scenario. So you get things like some of the bombers at one point, for British bombers, have a tail warning radar that puts them on alert if another aircraft comes in a set range. So they do get an alert warning if a Nightfighter starts coming up on that rear arc within a certain range. But the fact that they've got that radar on means that there is a region in a fan behind that bomber where German Nightfighters are coming to that area, sense their radar and pinpoint where the bomber is. So, and then you get some interesting other countermeasures. You get stuff that can blur out some of the ground radars. You get window, you get jammers. The British were hilarious. They would do things like put a microphone in the engines of a Lancaster, and they would just broadcast that on whatever radio network the German ground control were trying to communicate with the Nightfighters with. So all they get is coming over the radar. So they have to try and switch to a new channel. But particularly the radio operators on the British bombers, who are basically the electronic warfare officers, they're listening for what channels they're switching to and broadcasting this stuff. It's hilarious. There's all kinds of things that can detect German Nightfighter radars and put the bombers on alert. Now, when you close in on someone and can fire, you make a roll, but if the bomber's on the alert, they get to shoot back, or they might corkscrew, which basically puts them a couple of hexes away from the Nightfighter, and you've got to figure out which direction it went and try and close in on it. Goddamn pesky Lancasters. They can be quite nimble and quite difficult to shoot down if they know you're coming. If you've got oblique weapons, which is like, say, a bolt and pull Defiant that had a turret that could fire into them, you can do oblique fire, which means you don't have to be exactly behind someone. If you've got Musik, which is cannon that some German Nightfighter aircraft had behind the cockpit designed to fire diagonally up, they reduce the chance of a enemy bomber noticing you before you fire, and you do get a bonus on the damage and so on. They're very effective, and because people looking behind them for a night fighter closing in, they can't really see something coming, up on them from below. It actually took a long time for the British to figure out what was actually killing so many of their bombers. So, in many of the scenarios, if you're playing like German night fighters, you've got another problem, which is intruders. The best thing in the air at night, period, is a mosquito. The British have some superb night fighters by the end of the war, and the Germans aren't running bombing assaults on the UK. British night fighters are there hunting German night fighters because they're faster and they're nimbler, and their interception radars are really smacking good, and they are really, really good at picking up transmissions from German radio and German radars. So what the bomber player can have in some scenarios is he can have British intruders in amongst the bomber stream hunting for the night fighters. These can be bow fighters, which are brutally pretty tough, very heavily armoured. I love them to death. Love me a bow fighter. And the night fighting mosquitoes, which are just so fast. They're so much faster than German night fighters that even if you figure out where one is and try and give chase, you're gonna have your work cut out trying to find it. So there's that level of paranoia. Now, this isn't just Germans against British. They have everything in there. So if you want to play German Blitz against Britain with the early British interceptors, they used Hurricanes, they used Bolt and Paul Defiants, they used some converted Beauforts and these sorts of things. That's all in there. If you want the American Black Widows and so forth, they're in there. If you want to do Pacific theatre with American, say, F6 night fighters against Japanese night intruders, they're in there. There are whole sets of rules in there for torpedo bombers and low-level bombers, which is mostly going to come in on things like the Japanese scenarios where they're trying to attack fleets, and that's a whole bunch of other problems, because if these things are coming in low at night, some radars don't work against them once they drop below a certain band because of the noise coming up from the ground, so you have to switch to other things. But ships obviously have searchlights, and so different tactics there again. You've got Japanese night fighters trying to hold off night assaults from American bombers, which is really difficult because the Japanese don't have any airborne radars, and I don't think they've got ground radars either. They just got searchlights and and hope, and terrible armament on the bombs. So a big part of the fun of this I found was actually the big lists of all of the aircraft and all of the different radar sets and the different electronic countermeasures. Really interesting stuff. Historically it was great, but there were most surprising strengths and weaknesses in some of the aircraft. You look at something and say, wow, this has got great firepower as a night fighter, but then when you took a second look at it, it's like, oh, this thing's actually fragile. Or you take a look at it and you'd realise, hang on, this can't have the really good search radar in it. Well, it's the way that the cockpit and everything is laid out, it can't fit the bigger set, so they have to there's an alternative version that they use. Like, oh, okay. Or great aircraft, but its exhaust burns hot, it's easy to see. And there's others which are only just faster than the bombers that they're supposed to be chasing. So you have to start high and actually dive to get airspeed to come in and attack. So, that can be difficult. Some of the German Dorniers and so on, they're really not much faster than a bunch of Sterlings and Halifaxes, trundling slowly along in the dark. So, interesting. I mean, they've got the Me-262s, they've got the Focke-Wulf Uhus, and all that kind of jazz. And the different variants that come in with the different search radars. The search radars and so on, of course, they've all got the different ranges and they've all got their different strengths and weaknesses which are in there, and it'll say what countermeasures are effective against them. So the scenario book will tell you that, okay, we have a bomber stream coming in, you know, some of these have got rear warning radars. They are, however, using a homing beacon system to find their target, and the Germans are able to pick up the transmitters of this. So yeah, the actual stream leaders can actually be picked up on those tallies, and yeah, so you know, it's a really interesting game, not just a kind of literally lethal Marco Polo in the dark, but the tech race is really interesting as you see one thing trumping another, trumping another, trumping another. Eventually you can see the Germans are like really losing because the Allies are just, the British are just so good at this electronic stuff. But so in addition to all this stuff, so there are the supplemental rules, and the supplemental rules are full of things like blinding yourself from firing Nightfighter guns. Some Nightfighters, the positioning of the guns would cause night blindness when you fired them, and they note which aircraft you can do this. It's from poor placement on the guns or not having flash hider hoods. And so in the turn after which you've fired, your Nightfighter cannot fire again, and you have to roll to basically, you know, get your night vision back. You can't make tallies, you can't do anything other than kind of, you know, fly straight ahead. Everyone's blinded, this sort of thing. So yes, it brings in lots of things like that. It brings in more things about weather, and they're all worthwhile rules to bring in. The other thing the supplemental rules bring in is a campaign system, so you can play ongoing campaigns, and in this, pilots and crew, in fact, are all kept track of. They gain experience, which gives them bonuses under the system. They can become, the pilots can become, you know, expert in aces and so on. Aces can misuse their authority to get modifications to their aircraft that are normally, you know, rare to find. These guys can lean on people because they're in the news, and they can get modifications and so on to the aircraft. So yeah, it's a nice piece of work. So look, this is a terrific piece of work. I really like it. The components are simple. So it's, you know, it's paper maps, it's cardboard, it's the cardboard judge's screen, it's dice, it's counters, and that's all you need. But that historical information does actually really bring it bounding to life, and I really do like that kind of let's play murder in the dark. Yeah, it really does feel like that, you know. It's like, there you are, Nightfighters, like, where are you, little bastards? I know you're here somewhere, and like, bing, oh, there's someone. Oh no, hang on, he's gone. Yeah, so it's a nice piece of work. Simple, fun. Again, this is one I've played many a time, and I really do like it. It's a great piece of work. So yeah, GMT Games, check them out. They do lots of really good board war games, old style board war games, but are done really, really well. Had I more money, I would be getting a ton more of this stuff, because they do some great stuff for, like, you know, e-boats and small craft fighting in English Channel, and yeah, all kinds of very cool ideas. So anyway, cheers everyone. Do find the game and do look up GMT. Look after yourselves. Ooh. That was stronger than I thought. Okay, bye.